In the quiet suburbs of a small town nestled among towering oaks and neatly trimmed lawns, the Thompson family lived in a charming two-story home. The house, with its warm brick exterior and inviting front porch, was a haven for the Thompsons, a place where laughter echoed to the halls and every room held a memory. The family consisted of Sarah and Mark, both in their early 30s, and their two children, Emma and Lucas, aged 8 and 6 respectively. They had always been animal lovers, and their home was filled with the sounds of various pets. Dogs barking playfully, birds chirping merrily, and the occasional hamster wheel turning in the background. But among all their pets, there was one that stood out, a bobcat named Shadow. Shadow had come into their lives unexpectedly. One chilly autumn evening, Mark had been driving home from work when he spotted a small, injured animal by the side of the road. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a young bobcat, no older than a few months. Its leg was wounded, and it looked up at him with pleading eyes. Unable to leave it behind, Mark carefully wrapped the bobcat in his jacket and brought it home. The Thompsons, with their nurturing hearts, decided to care for the injured creature. They took it to the vet, who treated its leg and gave him instructions on how to care for it. Over time, Shadow healed and became a beloved member of the family. He roamed freely around the house, often curling up on the couch during family movie nights or chasing after the laser pointer with the enthusiasm of a kitten. However, recently, Shadow had developed a peculiar habit. Every morning, without fail, he would approach the large mirror in the hallway and begin pawing at it. At first, the Thompsons thought it was just a phase, a quirky behavior that would pass. But days turned into weeks, and Shadow's fascination with the mirror only intensified. He would sit in front of it for hours, his eyes fixed on his reflection, occasionally pawing the glass as if trying to interact with the cat he saw. Emma and Lucas found it amusing at first, giggling as Shadow made faces at himself in the mirror. But soon, the behavior became concerning. Shadow seemed fixated, almost obsessed, with the reflection. He would ignore his food, his toys, and even the family members trying to get his attention. Sarah, worried about her pet's well-being, decided to consult their veterinarian, Dr. Harris, a seasoned animal behaviorist. Listened intently as Sarah described Shadow's behavior. After a thoughtful pause, Dr. Harris explained that while it's not uncommon for cats to be intrigued by their reflections, an excessive fixation could indicate underlying issues, stress, anxiety, or even a neurological condition. Determined to help Shadow, Sarah and Mark decided to remove the mirror temporarily. They hoped that without the mirror, Shadow would return to his usual self. The next morning, as Shadow approached the hallway, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes scanned the spot where the mirror once stood, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed confused. He sniffed around, pawed at the empty space, and then looked up at Sarah with a soft meow. Relieved, Sarah gently petted him, whispering assurances that everything would be okay. But as she turned to walk away, something caught her eye. Beneath the spot where the mirror had hung, the floorboard seemed slightly displaced. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a faint gap between two of the wooden planks. Curious, Sarah knelt down and pressed her fingers against the gap. To her surprise, the floorboard gave way slightly, revealing a small compartment beneath. Her heart raced as she carefully pried open the hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a bundle. She gingerly unwrapped it, revealing a collection of old photographs, letters, and a peculiar stone amulet. The photographs depicted a family, much like the Thompsons, standing in front of a house strikingly similar to theirs. The letters were dated back several decades, written in elegant script, but the contents were faded and difficult to decipher. And the amulet, though worn with age, had intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Sarah's mind raced with questions. How had these items ended up hidden beneath their floorboards? Why had Shadow been so drawn to this spot? And what connection did these artifacts have to their home? As she sat back on her heels, pondering the mystery, Mark entered the room. His eyes widened in surprise as he took in the scene, the open compartment, the scattered photographs, and the amulet in Sarah's hands. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Sarah looked up at him, her face pale. "I don't know, Mark, but I think Shadow was trying to tell us something." The room fell silent, the weight of the discovery settling over them. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves and the house creaked softly, a reminder that even in the most familiar places, secrets could lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The morning after Sarah discovered the hidden compartment, the atmosphere in the Thompson household was heavier than usual. The bright, cheerful energy that typically filled their home seemed subdued, replaced with an underlying sense of uncertainty. Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photographs spread out before him. Sarah had meticulously examined each one, but their meaning remained elusive. "What do you think it all means?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with worry. Mark, deep in thought, absent-mindedly stirred his coffee. "I don't know. These photos, they look like they were taken in front of this house. But these people, I've never seen them before." He reached out and traced the edges of one of the photographs with his finger. "And the amulet, what's with the carvings? They don't look like anything I've ever seen." Sarah leaned closer, squinting at the photographs. There were a few that caught her attention. In one, a woman who looked strikingly similar to her was holding a child in front of the very same porch where their family had posed for countless photos. The resemblance was uncanny. But the strangest part was the empty space in the background. The house in the photograph had a different structure. The windows were larger, the porch was smaller, and the whole place seemed to have a more rustic, weathered look to it. "I don't know, but I feel like there's something we're missing. Something we're not seeing," Sarah murmured, her hand instinctively reaching for Shadow, who had been following her around all morning. He sat beside her, quietly observing the photographs, as though understanding the gravity of the situation. Mark, feeling the tension mounting, stood up and went to the hallway, where the empty spot on the wall where the mirror had been was still visible. The space felt off, like something was missing, not just a mirror, but something deeper, a presence that had been there and was now gone. He reached for the floorboards, wondering if there were more secrets hidden beneath the house. At that moment, the kids came running down the stairs, Emma with her ever-present enthusiasm, and Lucas trailing behind, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mom, Dad, Shadow's at it again," Emma exclaimed, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "He's pawing at the floorboards." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Mark, and without saying a word, both of them followed Emma down the hallway. There, standing in front of the same spot where the mirror had once hung, Shadow was, as Emma had said, pawing frantically at the floorboards. His usual playfulness was gone. Now, there was a sense of urgency in his movements. "This is strange," Mark said, kneeling down beside the Bobcat. "Why is he so fixated on this spot?" Sarah bent down as well, her voice soft but filled with concern. "Do you think he knows something we don't? That he's trying to tell us something?" Shadow paused for a moment, as though it hurt her, and then resumed pawing at the boards with even greater determination. His claws scraped against the wood, and it was then that Sarah noticed something strange. There was a faint clicking sound, a mechanism hidden beneath the floor. "Wait," Sarah whispered. "I think I hear something." Mark looked at her with surprise. "You think there's more to it? More hiding under here?" Sarah nodded, her hand trembling as she reached the floorboard. With a little pressure, the board shifted, revealing the hidden compartment once again. This time, the compartment seemed larger, deeper, even. There was a faint glow emanating from within, like the soft gleam of moonlight on a darkened night. "Shadow, stop," Sarah called gently, her voice almost pleading. "Let me look." Shadow, as if understanding, stepped aside and sat down, his eyes never leaving the opening. Sarah cautiously reached into the compartment and pulled out a small, ornate box, this one much smaller than the bundle from the morning before. The box was made of dark wood, intricately carved with symbols she had never seen before. It seemed ancient, and yet it felt strangely warm to the touch, as though it had been waiting to be found. With a deep breath, Sarah carefully opened the box. Inside was a single, faded note, written in a language that was completely foreign to her. Her heart raced as she scanned the symbols, knowing that the key to the mystery lay hidden within those words. "Mark, we need to figure out what this says," Sarah said, her voice filled with urgency. But before Mark could respond, a sudden chill filled the room. The air seemed to thicken, and Shadow, who had been so calm just moments before, began to grow restless again. He stood up, his tail twitching as he paced in front of the box. His eyes were wide, as if seeing something that Sarah and Mark could not. Then, as though a switch had been flipped, Shadow stopped dead in his tracks and let out a low growl. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard before, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the walls. "Sarah, do you hear that?" Mark asked, his voice strained. Sarah, her heart pounding, nodded. "I hear it too." The low growl continued, and the Thompson family felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over them. What had they uncovered, and what was Shadow trying to warn them about? The atmosphere in the house had shifted from uneasy to outright tense. The air felt heavier, as if something ancient, was beginning to awaken. Sarah held the small wooden box with the strange symbols, her fingers trembling as a chilling growl of Shadow echoed in her ears. The Bobcat, who had always been a playful and loving companion, was now on edge, his fur bristling, eyes wide with an almost unnatural intensity. Mark stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the box in her hands, then back to Shadow. "What's happening to him?" he muttered under his breath, his voice tight. This isn't like him. The growl, low and resonant, seemed to emanate not just from Shadow, but from the very walls of the house. It was as though the house itself was alive with a presence they couldn't see, a presence that was stirring in response to the mysterious discovery they had made. "Maybe we should call Dr. Harris again," Sarah suggested, her voice strained as she tried to calm Shadow, who was still pacing the floor, his tail flicking wildly. "This doesn't feel right." But Mark, looking around the room, seemed hesitant. "Do you really think it's just a behavioral issue? I mean, this is more than that. Sarah, this feels different." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Shadow. She had always trusted her instincts, and something deep within her was telling her that this wasn't a simple case of anxiety or stress. Shadow had been trying to tell them something that the family was not yet prepared to understand. As the minutes ticked by, the house seemed to grow quieter. The only sound now was the soft scratching of Shadow's paws on the wooden floor and the distant hum of the wind outside. Mark walked slowly over the window and peered out, his eyes scanning the yard. Everything appeared normal, but inside, a storm of confusion and fear raged within him. "Sarah," Mark began, his voice low, "I think there's more to this house than we realize. There's something hidden here, something tied to Shadow. I mean, why else would he react this way?" Before Sarah could respond, Shadow suddenly stopped pacing. He froze, his eyes locked onto the wall where the mirror had once hung. His body was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to snap. His tail flicked erratically, and for a long moment, the house was completely still, the tension in the air palpable. Then, with a sudden movement, Shadow darted forward and leaped onto the spot where the mirror had been. He pawed at the wall, his claws scraping against the wood, with a desperation that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Mark!" she gasped, her eyes wide. He's looking for something." Mark, his breath catching in his throat, moved toward Shadow. He kneeled down next to the Bobcat, gently trying to coax him away from the wall. But Shadow wouldn't budge. His eyes were wild, frantic, and filled with a deep, unexplainable fear. "It's like he's possessed," Mark muttered, reaching out to gently push Shadow aside. But before he could, something strange happened. The wall where Shadow had been scratching shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly at first. It was as though the wood itself had moved. A low, creaking sound echoed through the room as the wall shifted again, revealing a small opening just wide enough to fit a hand. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Mark, look, it's opening." Mark's eyes widened as he cautiously approached the wall. He ran his hand along the surface, feeling the coldness of the wood beneath his fingertips. It felt solid, yet the opening was growing wider with each passing second. Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance, their minds racing. What was inside? What else was hidden in this house? Taking a deep breath, Mark reached into the opening and pulled out what appeared to be a dusty, weathered journal. The leather cover was cracked, its pages yellow with age. As Mark opened it, The first few pages were written in the same strange language as a note from the small wooden box. It was the same writing Sarah had seen before, the same symbols that seemed to dance on the page, just out of her understanding. This isn't just some old book, Mark said, his voice tense. It's a record of something. But what? Who wrote this? Sarah, her curiosity piqued, stepped closer. We need to translate this. We need to know what it says. Just as Mark began to flip through the pages, Shadow's growl deepened. The Bobcat had returned to his spot in front of the wall and was pawing at the floorboards again, his movements frantic, almost as if he were trying to uncover something. Mark, something's wrong, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I feel like we're unlocking something we weren't meant to find. Mark nodded, his eyes dark with a mix of fear and realization. It's like Shadow's been leading us to this, like he knows what's hidden here. The words in the journal began to blur in Sarah's vision as a strange, sudden pressure filled her chest. She could feel it now, the weight of something ancient, something powerful, pressing down on her and her family. The journal seemed to pulse with energy, its secrets begging to be revealed. And then, as the journal's pages turned, one of them caught Sarah's eye, a drawing faint but unmistakable. It was a diagram of the house, marked with symbols in the same strange language. But what made her blood run cold was a final symbol, drawn just below the house, in the same place as their living room. It was a symbol she recognized from the carvings on the amulet. This is it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is what Shadow's been trying to show us. We're not alone here. The journal felt heavier in Sarah's hands now, as though the weight of its contents was far more than just paper and ink. The faint drawing of the house with strange symbols etched beneath it seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, drawing Sarah's attention back to the unsettling connection between the house, the hidden objects, and Shadow's strange behavior. Mark leaned over her shoulder, studying the drawing intently. That symbol, it's the same as the one on the amulet, he murmured, his voice tight. But why here? Why does it appear under our house? The room was silent, except for the soft rustling of the journal's pages, as Sarah turned them with trembling hands. She felt as though they had crossed a line, stepping into something ancient, something unspoken for decades. Whatever this symbol was, it was linked to their home and to Shadow. Outside, the wind began to pick up, howling through the trees, making the windows rattle. The house felt cold now, the warmth of the morning replaced by a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Shadow had stopped growling, but his posture remained tense, his eyes still locked onto the journal and the hidden compartment beneath the floor. Mark stood up, his eyes scanning the room as though waiting for something to reveal itself. I don't like this, Sarah. It feels like we're being watched. Like, we're not supposed to find this. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her instincts screaming that he was right. This wasn't just a simple mystery. It was something far darker. But we have to know, Mark. We have to understand what's happening. The sound of Shadow's claws scratching against the floor broke the tension in the room. He was pacing again, his tail twitching violently, as if sensing the growing unease. Sarah reached out to him, trying to soothe him, but he recoiled, his gaze fixed on the walls in the hidden compartment. It's like he's trapped in this cycle, Sarah said quietly, watching Shadow's frantic movements. Like he knows something we don't. Mark nodded, his brow furrowed in concern. Or he's trying to warn us. He's not just acting out of fear. This feels intentional, like he's been leading us here. Suddenly, the house creaked, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to reverberate through the floorboards. Sarah looked up, startled, as the walls seemed to groan under the weight of some unseen force. The floor beneath them shifted, and for a split second, it felt as though the house was alive, its very foundation breathing with the rhythm of an ancient heartbeat. Mark, did you feel that? Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. Mark didn't answer. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and disbelief as he took a step back from the wall. I think it's starting, Sarah. The house, it's reacting to us. Before they could say anything more, there was a loud thud, followed by a soft, scraping noise coming from behind the walls. Sarah's stomach tightened. The sound was like something or someone was moving inside the house, behind the very walls that had once felt so safe, so ordinary. Mark rushed the hallway, his heart racing. "It's coming from the crawl space," he said, his voice barely audible. "We need to check it out." Sarah followed him, her mind spinning with questions. What could it be? Was it truly alive? Or was this all some elaborate trick that they couldn't yet understand? They reached the small hatch near the stairs, the entrance to the crawl space where the house's foundations could be seen. It had always been a dark, forgotten area, used only for storage. The entrance had never been used in years. But now, it felt like the very heart of the house was beckoning them toward it. Mark lifted the hatch, revealing the narrow, pitch-black crawl space below. The faintest sliver of light filtered through the cracks of the wooden beams. But beyond that, darkness stretched endlessly. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. Mark hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We have to know what's down there. Whatever's happening. It's not just shadow. It's the house. It's connected to us." They both crouched down, and with a deep breath, Mark descended first, followed by Sarah. The air in the crawl space was damp and musty, the smell of aged wood and earth clinging to their clothes as they slowly made their way deeper into darkness. The beams above creaked with every step they took, as though the house was shifting along with them. The further they went, the more the temperature seemed to drop. A cold, oppressive sensation weighed down on their shoulders, making it harder to breathe. Sarah felt a creeping sensation at the back of her neck, as though someone or something was watching them. She glanced over at Mark, but his face was set in grim determination. They reached the far end of the crawl space, where an old wooden door stood, small, unassuming, and weathered by time. It looked out of place here, as if it didn't belong with the rest of the house. This wasn't here before," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Mark reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking. As he turned it, the door creaked open with an almost unnatural slowness. The darkness beyond seemed to beckon them forward, and a faint, eerie sound, a soft whisper, floated through the air. "Do you hear that?" Mark asked, his voice barely audible. Before Sarah could respond, a shadow flickered in the doorway, and then there was the unmistakable sound of paws on the ground. Shadow had followed them into the crawl space. But as they turned to face the Bobcat, they realized something terrifying. Shadow was no longer the same. His eyes were glowing with an unnatural light, and his movements were jerky, almost robotic. He was no longer the playful, affectionate pet they had known. Something had changed, something that Sarah and Mark could not yet understand. With a sharp hiss, Shadow lunged toward the door, disappearing into the pitch-black darkness beyond. "Shadow!" Sarah cried, rushing after him. But as she stepped through the door, she froze. Before her lay not the familiar crawl space, but a vast, cavernous room, its walls lined with ancient symbols and strange markings, some of which matched the symbols from a journal. And in the center of the room stood an altar, a stone platform, stained with the marks of age. Atop it lay a figure, cloaked in shadow, its face hidden in the darkness. As the figure moved, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the room. "You have uncovered what was never meant to be found." The voice that echoed through the cavernous room seemed to reverberate deep within Sarah's chest. It was a voice both ancient and powerful, carrying the weight of centuries. She stood frozen, her heart racing, her breath shallow. Mark, still beside her, looked equally as stunned, his hand gripping her arm for support. The figure before them remained cloaked in shadow, its form indistinct, but its presence was overwhelming, as though it filled the entire space. Shadow, the Bobcat, stood motionless by the figure, his glowing eyes fixed on Sarah and Mark, his body unnaturally still. It was as though he had become a mere vessel for something far greater. "You have uncovered what was never meant to be found," the voice repeated, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. "The bond you share with this house, the history of it, you were never meant to discover the truth." Mark's voice was shaky as he spoke, but there was a determination behind it. "What do you mean? What is this place? Why is he like this?" The figure's shadowed form seemed to shift as it spoke again, its voice softer now, almost sorrowful. "This house, this land, it is bound by a pact, one forged long ago when it was first built. The house was never meant to be a sanctuary. It was a prison, a place to contain what should have remained hidden. Sarah's mind raced. She glanced down at Shadow, whose eyes were still glowing with that unsettling light, yet something about him seemed distant. It was as though he was no longer truly there, as though his body had become a conduit for something else. Mark took a step forward, his voice trembling with disbelief. A prison for what? And how does it connect to Shadow? The entity that resides here, the figure began, its tone growing more somber, has existed for centuries. It is neither alive nor dead, but a force, a presence that thrives on fear, on the emotions of those who live within its grasp. Over the years, it is fed on the energy of those who entered this house, using them as pawns in its games. Sarah's heart sank. She looked around the room, taking in the strange symbols on the walls, the eerie markings that seemed to pulse with dark energy. This was no ordinary house. This was a place steeped in something far darker than they had ever imagined. But what does Shadow have to do with it? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's form flickered, as if in hesitation, before continuing. Shadow was never meant to be here. He was brought into this house by fate, and his bond with you, with your family, is no accident. The energy that this entity feeds on is tied to those it deems worthy, and you, Sarah and Mark, have unknowingly crossed that threshold. Sarah's stomach churned with the revelation. What do you mean by worthy? What's happening to us? The figure paused, its voice softer now, almost remorseful. This house chooses its inhabitants, drawing those with a particular resonance. It knows when to take what it needs. And Shadow, the creature you thought of as a pet, was meant to be its instrument. He was drawn to you because of your connection to this house. And now, he has become its vessel. Mark's face went pale. So, Shadow, he's not himself anymore? The figure's silence spoke volumes. Sarah felt a surge of grief rise in her chest. The bobcat they had cared for, the animal who had been their friend, had been consumed by something far beyond their understanding. He was no longer the playful creature that had curled up beside them at night. He was something else entirely. Why has he been acting like this? Sarah pressed, her voice thick with emotion. Why was he pawing at the mirror? What was he trying to show us? The figure's shadowed form seemed to shift again, as if it were contemplating the answer. The mirror was a portal, a reflection of the house's true nature. Shadow was drawn to it because it contained a fragment of the entity's power. He was trying to communicate with you, to warn you of what was to come. But now that the bond is complete, there is little time left. Little time left? Mark repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. What does that mean? It means, the figure said, its voice suddenly sharp with urgency, that the entity is awakening. It will no longer be content with merely feeding on the emotions of the living. It is reaching out to possess those who reside within its walls. And soon, it will be too late for any of you to escape. Sarah's heart stopped. Escape? Are you telling us we can't get out of here? That we're trapped? You are not just trapped in this house, the figure replied, its voice filled with a deep, almost sorrowful gravity. You are trapped within the entity's grip. It controls everything here. It controls time, space, and now your fate. Fear surged through Sarah's veins. She reached for Mark's hand, gripping it tightly as the weight of their predicament settled upon them. They had unknowingly walked into something far darker than they could have ever anticipated. Their home, the place they had come to love, was not just a house. It was a prison built to contain a malevolent force that had been waiting for the right moment to escape. The figure's voice, cold and ominous, brought Sarah back to the present. You must make a choice now. The entity is too powerful to defeat by conventional means. But there is one way to break the bond. Mark stepped forward, his voice filled with desperation. Tell us what to do. We'll do anything. The figure's form seemed to grow even darker, as though it was fading into the shadows itself. To break the bond, you must sever the connection between the house and its prisoner. But be warned, this will come at a cost. The entity will fight to keep its hold on you, and Shadow, he will fight too. You cannot save him without losing something in return. Sarah's breath hitched as she understood the magnitude of the choice they had to make. In order to free Shadow and end the curse that had taken hold of their home, they would have to sacrifice something precious. But what was that sacrifice? And could they truly live with the consequences? The figure's final words echoed through the room, sealing their fate. Make your choice, but know this. Once the bond is broken, there will be no going back. The room fell into a heavy silence after the figure's warning. Sarah's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had been revealed. The weight of the figure's words, the undeniable truth that they were trapped, not just in a house, but in a cycle of darkness that had been woven into the very fabric of their lives, felt suffocating. Mark squeezed her hand, his grip tight with both fear and resolve. "We have to save Shadow," he said, his voice firm despite the panic in his eyes. "He's part of our family. We can't let him become a vessel for this thing." Sarah nodded, her heart heavy with the same sense of determination. She had never thought that the house they had come to love would be their prison. The bond they shared with Shadow, the pet they had rescued, had been manipulated by something far beyond their comprehension. And now, to free him, they would have to confront the entity that had lived within these walls for centuries. But the cost, that was something they could never have imagined. "We'll do whatever it takes," Sarah said, her voice steady, though it shook with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "But how do we break the bond?" The figure's shadow seemed to deepen in the corner of the room, almost as if it was watching them, waiting for them to make a decision. "To sever the bond," it replied, "you must go to the heart of the house, where the source of its power lies. It is there that the entity's grip is strongest. But beware, the closer you get to it, the more the house will fight to keep you trapped." The figure's words felt like a cold gust of wind, chilling them both to their core. But Sarah's resolve was unwavering. They had already come so far, uncovered so many secrets. There was no turning back now. "Where is this heart?" Mark asked, his voice strained with urgency. The figure paused before answering, its presence seeming to grow heavier in the air. "It is beneath you. The heart of the house lies deep in the foundation, hidden beneath the very floorboards you stand on. The altar, the place of sacrifice, is where you must confront the entity. It is the only way to break the bond." Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance. Beneath the house. It made sense. The crawl space, the hidden compartment, the symbols, they all pointed to one place. But it was terrified to think of venturing even deeper into the unknown. "Then let's do it," Sarah said, determination in her voice. "We have to save him." With that, they turned toward Shadow, who had been eerily silent, watching them closely. His once glowing eyes had dimmed, but there was still an unsettling intensity in his gaze. It was as though he was waiting for them to make the choice, waiting for them to decide his fate. Mark crouched down beside the Bobcat, gently stroking his fur. "We're going to set you free, buddy. Just hang on." Shadow responded with a soft, almost resigned purr. His body relaxed as if he understood. But there was no time to waste. The house's grip was tightening with each passing second, and they had no way of knowing how much longer they had before it became too late. They made their way to the back of the house, where they knew the foundation's access point was. The air grew colder as they descended into the darkness of the crawl space again. The walls seemed closed around them, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick, oppressive silence. As they approached the spot where the altar was supposed to be, they could feel it, the pulse of energy thrumming through the floor. It was like the heartbeat of the house itself, a slow, rhythmic thrum that filled the air with dread. Mark knelt down, feeling the floorboards beneath his hands. "It's here," he whispered. "This is it." With a sudden rush of energy, the floorboards began to shift. The wooden planks groaned as they separated, revealing a deep, dark opening below them. It was more than just a crawl space now. It was a pit, dark, endless, and filled with an unnatural force. Sarah shuddered at the sight, her stomach tightening with fear. "This is where it all started," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. They had no choice now. They had to confront whatever lay at the heart of the house. As they descended into the pit, Shadow followed them, his movements unnaturally stiff but determined. They reached the altar, a stone platform as old and weathered as the house itself. The air around was thick with energy, the very atmosphere crackling with power. And then the entity revealed itself. It wasn't a figure, not a person. It was more of a presence, a shifting shadow that filled the room, a dark cloud of energy that twisted and churned, its form constantly changing, never quite solid. It was a house itself, and it had been feeding on their emotions, on their fear, on their connection to the place. "You have come to challenge me." The entity spoke, its voice reverberating through the air like 1,000 whispers. "But you cannot defeat me. I am this house. I am its foundation." Sarah felt the power of the entity pressing down on her, but she stood firm. "We will not let you control us. We're breaking the bond." With a cry, Mark stepped forward, and in his hand, he held the amulet, Shadow's amulet, the same one that had started all of this. It glowed faintly in the darkness, as if responding to the energy of the entity. The entity screeched, its form flickering violently. "No, you cannot break the bond. You belong to me." But Sarah and Mark were resolute. Together, they placed the amulet on the altar. A blinding light erupted from it, filling the room with a brilliant glow. The entity howled, a sound so deafening that it shook the very walls of the house. And then, as quickly as it had started, the light vanished. The entity's presence was gone. The air cleared, and the oppressive weight that had been hanging over them lifted. Shadow, now freed, looked up at them, his eyes no longer glowing but returning to their soft, familiar warmth. The house was still. The strange energy that had once filled it was gone. The mystery, the fear, the darkness, all had been banished. Sarah and Mark stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Shadow was free, and so was their home. As they made their way back up to the surface, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the house. It was a new beginning, one filled with hope, a new chapter in their lives that they never could have imagined. "We did it," Mark said softly, his voice filled with awe. Sarah smiled, looking down at Shadow, who was now walking beside them, calm and content. "Yes," she said, her voice steady with the certainty that they had made the right choice. "We did." Sometimes, the greatest challenges in life aren't the ones we face alone, but the ones we face with those we love. And even in the darkest of times, there is always a light, if we have the courage to find it.